I've worked as a nurse in several hospitals and care facilities over the years. Before the one I'm at now, I used to work at a geriatric hospital about 30 minutes from my house. I'd already spent plenty of time caring for elderly patients, so nothing about the place felt new to me, at least not at first. I'd only been there for a couple of weeks when this happened. You'll soon understand why that was enough. It was my second to last shift, though I didn't know it at the time. I was on the graveyard shift, running on negative hours of sleep, assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients there adored me. Maybe it was because I was a young woman in my 20s, surrounded by people lost somewhere deep in their own memories. To them, I was probably a reminder of the now, someone who tethered them, if only briefly, to the present moment. When you're alone too long, your mind drifts. But when someone enters your space, even for a second, they anchor you to reality. That night, I had several patients to check on, but one stood out. Her name was Lena. It was my first night with her, and every time I entered her room, she told me about the voices she kept hearing and the man dressed in black standing in the corner. The woman sharing her room had already asked to keep her curtain closed, just to avoid Lena's outbursts. She was sweet, always smiled when I came around, but didn't talk much. Her memory was slipping fast. By 11 p.m., most of the ward had fallen asleep, everyone except Lena. She'd call me in, trembling, whispering about that same man in black staring at her. I'll be honest, it unnerved me. I believe that she genuinely saw and heard these things, and as much as it creeped me out, I felt sorry for her. I couldn't imagine how terrifying it must have been to live in a world your mind created against your will. Still, I tried to comfort her. I didn't want to turn on the TV and disturb her roommate, so I just held Lena's hands and said softly, "It's okay. Just breathe and relax. You're not alone. I'm right here, always a call away." That seemed to help. The next time I checked on her, she was finally asleep. When the ward goes quiet, time slows to a crawl. Sometimes it feels like it even moves backward. An hour or two later, I was restocking linens in a small, silent supply room with the door closed when I heard something behind me. A soft sound barely there, but enough to make me freeze. I turned around. Nothing. I shrugged it off and went back to work. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked down, saw the indentation of fingers pressing into my scrubs, and screamed. But when I spun around, there was no one there. My heart was pounding. The hallway outside was empty, dead quiet. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on me. I kept working, filled my cart, and turned toward the door. That's when I saw him. A man dressed in black, standing outside the door, staring through the glass smiling. My scream echoed through the entire ward. The man vanished just seconds before one of my fellow nurses burst in to help me off the floor. I was shaking, gasping for breath. I asked if she'd seen the man in black. She looked confused. "What man?" "There's no one here." We checked every room. No one matching that description. My scream had woken Lena. When I went to check on her, she was trembling. Talking about the screams, she didn't know they'd been mine. I asked her what the man in black looked like. Her face grew tense, eyes narrowing in focus. Then she asked, quietly, "How did you know?" My heart skipped. Then Lena started screaming, "Get me out of here. He's coming." The other nurses rushed in to calm her down. I was reassigned to another ward for the rest of the night, and eventually went home early, shaken to my core. The next morning, I texted the head nurse and told her my next shift would be my last. I couldn't set foot in that building again. She understood. I've never had hallucinations, never been diagnosed with anything. Sure, sleep deprivation can mess with your head, but this was something else. Maybe my mind had been primed by Lena's stories. Maybe exhaustion had blurred the line between her world and mine. But that hand on my shoulder, that smiling man behind the glass, just as Lena had described, it felt real. Too real. And if it truly was something supernatural, I hope it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. 3 years ago, I came down with bacterial meningitis. I live in South Florida, and as far as I know, there wasn't any outbreak at the time. I still have no idea how I caught it or who I might have caught it from. The symptoms came fast and hard: splitting headaches, waves of nausea, confusion, and an overwhelming sleepiness that made it hard to move. I couldn't eat, could barely think, but when the hallucinations started, that's when I knew something was terribly wrong. One afternoon, while my husband was at work, I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard a small voice from downstairs, a child's voice. It said, "Mom, we don't have any children." Heart pounding, I dragged myself out of bed and looked down the staircase. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. My husband's car wasn't even in the driveway. He was hours from home. The pain from standing was unbearable, so I went back to bed. A few minutes later, the voice came again. Softer this time. "Hello?" That's when I broke down. I grabbed my phone, sobbing as I called my husband, telling him I was hearing a child's voice inside the house, that I thought I was hallucinating. He could hear the panic in my voice. Without hesitation, he left work early to take me to the hospital. While I waited for him to get home, I tried to change out of my pajamas, but halfway through, I had to rush to the bathroom to vomit. As I was leaning over the sink, retching, I heard another voice, this time just outside the bathroom door. I couldn't make out what it said, or even tell if it was the same child. By then, I was shaking uncontrollably. When we finally reached the hospital, the doctors confirmed it bacterial meningitis. If I'd waited much longer, it could have been fatal. The doctor told me hallucinations weren't common with meningitis, but not impossible. My fever had spiked so high that my brain was essentially under siege. They hooked me up to N4 and started antibiotics immediately. My husband stayed with me for a few hours before. Heading home around 10 p.m., the nurse reminded me to press the call button if I needed anything. Even though I still felt miserable, exhaustion pulled me under fast. That's when the dream began. In it, my ex-husband was standing over my hospital bed, looking down at me with that same cruel, familiar expression. He started talking his words venomous. He said horrible things about my current husband, sneering that he was glad I was okay and that he'd decome as soon as my husband left. Then his tone darkened. He said he hated my husband, that he wanted to kill him. He brushed a hand across my forehead, gently, almost tenderly, and then walked out of the room. I've had nightmares about my ex before. He was abusive, manipulative, our marriage ended badly. Still, this one felt different. Too vivid, too close. I woke up dizzy and disoriented. My heart was racing. When I looked around, I noticed something odd. A chair had been pulled up beside my bed. It hadn't been there when my husband left. But no one was in it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a nurse would stop by while I was asleep. I turned over and drifted back into a foggy half-sleep. Morning came. The nurse came in to check my vitals, and I mentioned the dream. I told her it felt so real. She smiled at first until I told her who was in it. Then her expression changed. "That wasn't a dream," she said carefully. "Your cousin came to visit you last night," I blinked. "What? I don't have any cousins who live in this state." Her face grew tense. "Well," she said, "someone who said they were your cousin David visited you late last night." My blood ran cold. David was my ex-husband's name. I told her everything. She called the doctor, who explained that the antibiotics might have caused delirium, that I could have been half asleep, half awake, unable to separate dream from reality. I wanted to believe that. I really did. When my husband came after work, I told him the story. He was furious and scared. Later that day, I texted David, "What the hell were you doing at the hospital? How did you even know I was there?" The message delivered. No reply. So I sent another. "I heard everything you said about my husband. If you ever come near me again, I'll call the police." A few minutes later, he finally replied, "I never said anything like that. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You must have imagined it in your sleep." I typed back, "Stay out of my life or I'll make sure the police do it for me." He never answered. I didn't tell my husband what I'd heard in that dream or whatever it was. Maybe it was delirium. Maybe the antibiotics blurred the lines between memory and reality. But deep down, part of me still wonders. A week later, I was discharged. Physically, I recovered. Mentally, I'm not sure I ever did. This happened to me back in 2019, and I still can't work night shifts anymore because of it. I was a nursing assistant at St. Mary's Hospital in rural Pennsylvania. The building was old, like 1920s old, and the fourth floor had been abandoned for years due to budget cuts. But what happened to me that night made me realize there might have been other reasons they sealed it off. It was a Tuesday in October, around 2:30 a.m. I was working the night shift in the ICU on the third floor. Anyone who's worked nights in a hospital knows that feeling, the fluorescent lights humming, the occasional beep of a monitor, and that heavy silence that presses down on everything. It's unsettling even on a normal night. I was doing my rounds, checking on patients when I heard it for the first time. Footsteps, directly above me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth across the ceiling. I stopped dead in the hallway and listened. The fourth floor was supposed to be completely empty, locked. There wasn't even supposed to be a way to access it without a special key that only maintenance had. I radioed Tom, the security guard on duty. "Hey, is anyone doing work on the fourth floor tonight?" Static, then his voice. "Fourth floor? That's been sealed for like 3 years. Why?" "I'm hearing footsteps up there." Long pause. "Probably just the building settling. These old places make weird noises." I wanted to believe him. I tried to get back to work, but the footsteps continued. Back and forth. Back and forth. Always the same pattern, like someone pacing in agitation. Then they stopped, right above the nurse's station where I was charting. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Around 3:15 a.m., I had to go down to the pharmacy on the first floor to grab some medication. The hospital at night is a maze of dimly lit corridors, and I took the stairs because the elevator always creeped me out, too slow, too enclosed. As I was coming back up, I passed the door to the fourth floor. It was chained shut with a padlock, just like always. But as I walked past, I swear I heard breathing on the other side. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. I practically ran back to the third floor. My coworker, Jennifer, arrived around 4 a.m. to help with the morning prep work. I mentioned the footsteps to her and her face went pale. "You heard them too?" she whispered. "I worked here 5 years ago, before they closed that floor. We used to hear things all the time, but it got worse toward the end." "What do you mean, worse?" She looked around nervously, like she didn't want anyone to overhear. "Room 4C. A patient died there in the 80s during a surgery. Something went wrong with the anesthesia, and he woke up during the procedure but couldn't move or speak. By the time they realized, the damage was done. After that, nurses started refusing to go into that room. They'd hear knocking from inside, even when it was empty. Equipment would turn on by itself, and people started seeing ... him. Seeing what? A man in a hospital gown, standing in the corner, just staring, never moving. One nurse quit on the spot after she saw him. Said his eyes were open but completely black, like they'd been burned out. I felt my skin crawl. "Why didn't anyone tell me this when I started working here?" Jennifer shrugged. "Management doesn't like people talking about it. Bad for morale." They eventually just closed the whole floor and pretended the problem went away. But the problem hadn't gone away, it had just been contained. At 5:30 a.m., I was in a patient's room adjusting their floor when the call button for room 312 started going off. That was strange because 312 was empty. We were between patients and the room hadn't been cleaned yet. I walked down the hall and pushed open the door. The room was freezing. I could see my breath. And the call button was pressed in, held down by what looked like a handprint on the wall. But here's the thing that still makes my blood run cold. The handprint was too high up, like 7 feet high. No one standing normally could have reached it. I slowly backed out of the room and radioed Tom again. "I need you on the third floor right now. What's wrong?" "Just, please come up here." While I waited, I heard them again, the footsteps on the fourth floor. But this time they weren't pacing. They were running. Running hard, like someone was being chased. They ran the length of the ceiling above me, and then there was a massive bang, like a body slamming into a door. Then silence. Tom arrived, and I showed him the handprint. He went pale too. "I'll call the supervisor," was all he said. But Before he could make the call, every single call button on the floor went off simultaneously. All of them. The nurse's station lit up like a Christmas tree, and the chiming was deafening. Patients started waking up, confused and frightened. Jennifer and I ran around trying to calm everyone down while Tom stood there frozen, staring at the console. Then they all stopped at once, just like that. Complete silence, except for the confused murmuring of patients. "I'm calling the supervisor right now," Tom said, his voice shaking. "This is way above my pay grade, the last thing that happened, the thing that made me put in my 2 weeks. Notice the next day occurred right before my shift ended at 7 a.m. I was in the supply room grabbing fresh linens when the door slammed shut behind me. I tried the handle, locked, from the outside. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard breathing again. That same wet, labored breathing I'd heard at the fourth floor door, but this time it was in the room with me. Right behind me, I could feel cold air on the back of my neck. Then, in my ear, a voice whispered, "Room 4C." The lights came back on. The door swung open. Jennifer was standing there looking concerned. "Are you okay?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." I quit the next morning. I heard later that 3 other people quit within the same week, all citing similar experiences. The hospital brought in some kind of consultant, but I don't know what they found. I don't want to know. I still have nightmares about that breathing, about that handprint on the wall, about whatever was pacing on that sealed 4th floor. Some places should stay locked for a reason. St. Mary's 4th floor is one of them. And I never did find out what was in room 4C.